Thanks for tuning in to the World XP podcast. If you're enjoying the content, please drop us up, drop a like, and let us know your thoughts below in the comments. Also, please consider supporting our podcast via the link below. It really helps us out. KJ, welcome to the World XP podcast. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. So do you want to start with just a quick who you are and what you do? And then we were just chatting about kind of how we were going to frame the conversation. Actually, I think it'll work itself out quite nicely if we just go chronologically. So if we start with a kind of a quick intro, who you are, what you do, and then we'll just jump right into it.
Great. Who I am, what I do. I feel like that could be like a deep question, but we'll keep it surface level. And
It could be. We got time.
I am KJ Spisak, and I am currently I'm a sports agent that represent women's soccer player, specifically. I'm a former player, played collegiately, professionally, had some international youth experience and uh, professional coaching experience and whatnot. But that's who I am and what I do. Massive advocate for women's sports.
Fair enough. Um, so okay, so you started off playing when you were what, like 3, 4, 5, something like that?
Yeah, I think at like a local church rec team, probably 4 or 5, I think.
So okay, so let's go in. Did you have parents that were involved, or how did you discover the game? Because I think at that time were you young-ish when Mia Hamm and Brandy Chastain and that cover was on the cover of Sports Illustrated and all that stuff, or was that
Yeah,
later?
I think I was in middle school when that happened. 99, right? That
Yeah,
was
yeah,
the World Cup 99. I was in middle school. So yeah, that was, what do the kids say? Core memory.
yeah.
It's very much a core memory for me. But what got me into soccer is my family is has a rich history in soccer. My uncle played professionally for the St. Louis Steamers in the indoor league. He played for the U.S. national team. And then my great uncle was a reporter at the 1950s U.S. England match.
Oh wow.
Whatever historical match, I should know this. It's family history, but um, yeah. So it's ingrained in our blood, and it was what we were exposed to at a young age, along with a lot of other sports. And I'm from the soccer capital of America, St. Louis. So it's deep in the roots of St. Louis.
Very nice. So okay, so you start playing, you got some family that are involved. And then we have the core memory, of course, 99 World Cup. And then how does your journey take you from at that time in the women's sort of professional route? Because I can imagine, even speaking for myself, when I was going from high school into college, the kind of professional routes were very, I don't want to say limited, um, but now there's MLS academies and these agents taking kids to Europe to try out for like third division Portugal teams or like all these other things that I'm hearing about now as I'm like 27. I didn't know about any of that stuff when I was in high school. And I can imagine it was even more difficult or more convoluted and confusing for you. So how did your kind of journey manifest itself over the course of like high school into college and then into the pro scene?
I think I found at a young age, I found a lot of success that I didn't know about. But I loved the team atmosphere. So that's what really got me into soccer. Um, I tried out for my uncle's team, the uncle who played professionally. It was a year above me, and he basically took me as like a family favor, essentially, is how I made that team. And it was like U10. I wasn't good enough. I was like lanky and big and like so awkward. But one of the first training sessions, he was like, "Do we have any goalkeepers?" "No, KJ, you're it." So I was forced to play goalkeeper. That was my only way onto the team, and I hated it. I used to cry. Um, but my mom would say, "You have to have a conversation with him and tell him you don't want to play." I was like, "No, he's your brother." But he's like, my mom would be like, "It's your coach. You have to have the conversation." Needless to say, I never had the conversation with him. So I was a goalkeeper my whole life. Um, and I, I fell in love with the team aspect of it. Some of my dearest friends were on my club team, and then I ended up being good enough to get a college scholarship. And at that time, like I said, it was like middle school when the 99 World Cup was won, and then which ignited the WUSA, WUSA, the second or the first professional league for women in the United States. And the pathway then, and still is, but we're seeing a shift, as you've mentioned. The pathway was from youth soccer, you would go to college, and then college, now we had this new exciting women's league to look forward to. And, in the past, it's always been you either play on the national team or there's nothing post college for you. And that was the brutal reality of women's soccer and how many roster spots are on the national team. Not many.
Yeah.
You're talking about, 25 to 30 people within that roster. But the WUSA really gave girls and women like me to hope, and to dream. And that sounds so cheesy, but it's real. Like you need to see it to, again, very cliche, to believe that you can be part of something like that. But now we're seeing a shift in signing younger kids. Um, Leagues across the world are starting to catch on, and whether it's England having their own league, the Italian league is becoming stronger and stronger, the Spanish league as well. There's just been a big boom across the board in women's sports.
Yeah, I've noticed that even so mentioned this to you off camera, but this year in EA's they don't call it FIFA anymore, but they have the women's cards in the game, and the amount of American players that are overseas, like younger ones. I think Corbin Albert comes to mind. I think she's playing for PSG. I think she's like 19 or 20. Is that
Mhm.
about right? And I'm seeing this like the shift now is there's American players all over the place, and you look at and it's really cool to me, right? Because when you filter through the like the cards in your club, 2 years ago, if you filtered on USA, it would be all like silver and bronze cards just because of where we are against Brazil or France or whatever. But now, if you filter by USA, it's loads of high-rated gold cards, which is super cool. But they're all women's, and
Yeah.
a bunch of them are overseas. A bunch of them are here, of course. And so that shift, I think, has been very cool. You did mention though that so there's a first try for the women's professional league in the US, and then the second and then the third one. When did Europe start throwing money in? I know like where was the shift along for in the women's professional game to where because it seemed to me like it didn't I knew that it existed growing up. I was like, oh, there's a women's league, obviously, because men's league and women's league, but it didn't occurred to me until I became like an adult. I was like, oh, all the financial difficulties and things.
Mhm.
So how did that work itself out in the US? And I guess on top of that, when did Europe start becoming what it is now for you see like they fill out the new camp with Ballon d'Or winners and Putellas and Bonmati and all them and like now they're kind of like if you pay attention to soccer, you know who they are as well as the men. When did that it seemed like it was very sudden, but was it or I don't know. There's a lot in that, but what are your thoughts on all that?
Think we are in like a golden era for women's sports right now. I think it's been a slow build, especially in the US, and the US has been kind of the driving force in all of this. Um, this is our third attempt at a league, at a professional league. So we had the WUSA, which like was Mia Hamm's era, and then that unfortunately folded after 3 years. And then a couple of years later, um, the WPS started, Women's Professional Soccer started. So that was attempt number two at a league. And I have both horror stories and like entertaining stories from my experience in that. So when the WUSA, folded, I was in college, and that was my dream and a lot of people's dream to play professionally. And we had this, it was tangible. We could see it, we could feel it. And then it folded, and then it was like, well, now what? Like, yes, I'm getting a degree, which is awesome. Now I have to pivot and figure out, am I applying for jobs right away? Um, so, but in the WPS, that too lasted 3 years. The second year I played for a team in St. Louis, and mid-season, I'll never forget this. We came off the field from training and came into like the office area, the locker room area, and we got pulled into a meeting, and they're like, "We're, we're holding this meeting because ownership left overnight, and there's no longer a team." And that was my first real look at why representation and agency matters, because we had players who were high profiled on the national team who had agents, and then you had players who are incredible players and starters in the WPS and the highest in the game in the world. They didn't have representation because nobody wanted to represent them because they weren't making enough money, essentially. Um,
What
so
time frame is this about?
good question. 20 2009, 2010, 2011, I think.
Okay.
Um, or it shifted back a year.
Either way, about
Yeah,
that time.
getting
Yeah.
too old to remember dates. Um, but to your point, like people didn't really know that women's professional sports existed at that time. So like our fan base was smaller. It was, yes, local families and um, you know, former players, former women's players and collegiate players continuing on, fans continuing on. Um, but I feel like in this third attempt, we have an established fan base that is now older because they've paid attention through WUSA and WPS, and now we have this loyal foundational uh, fan base that has really set the NWSL up for success. And now we're trying to continue to grow our fan base. And again, to what you were saying earlier, is that visibility matters. Like seeing women on EAFC is wildly important for gamers to like who don't really know the sport but know it through FIFA or EAFA or FC. They now know what who to look for, and that we're on TV, and that it's people are just paying attention more, and visibility really matters. And with that is the NWSL just signed a pretty decent media deal, putting us on TV more often. The sponsorship and investment continues to grow. Right now, you're seeing the San Diego Wave. Um, the owner bought in for $2 million and is selling for $160 million 3 years.
Ooh, very nice.
So investing is paying off. And I think in the USA and WPS, we had investors who were, willing to put money up. But I think people need to understand that it's not a short game and it's not a short gain. It's a long game that we're playing because we are 100 years behind our male counterparts in their leagues and their growth of fan base and growth of investment. So we're seeing a boom and a surge, and I think it's going to continue to grow, but it's not going to be. It's got to be a steady incline. It's not going to be like skyrocketed because that's what kind of happened in the past. It skyrocketed in investment and then it depleted. Um, and before the leagues were kind of on this rotation of when the women's national team were performing and in the World Cup, people were paying attention, and then we would try to ride the wave as long as we could until the next World Cup. But now there's like a sustained interest in the league.
Yeah, for sure. Because I honestly couldn't tell you. So what World Cup was when? Oh, it was just this past year, wasn't it?
Hmm.
For and you know what's wild about that is the 2015 World Cup, I remember very clearly. 2011, I remember very clearly, and even 2019, I remember very clearly. And this past one, maybe it's because I'm in a different place in life and I don't I have less time, but I forgot that it happened, but I just knew that the women's leagues were happening. Like I was more paying attention to what was going on in Europe with like the Women's Champions League than I was the World Cup at some point, which I think speaks to exactly what you're saying. I want to go back to when they're like, oh yeah, ownership left. So for you as a player, Um, well, how long in between that league, the second league folding, and NWSL start? Was there a long time in between or just a year? I don't recall exactly when
I
NWSL
think it
started.
was 2 years. 2 years? Don't quote me on this. I'm not sure. Again, I need to go back and brush up on
Yeah.
my history,
No,
but
no, no, all good. So for you as a player, where are you at mentally? Are you back into like, do I need to go find a job? Or at this point, is there enough women's soccer around that you're like, well, I could go coach or I could
yeah,
do
that's a
like
great
where were you
question.
at?
At the time, I was in a mode where obviously complete panic. When the team folded, I was one of the fortunate ones to get picked up by another team.
Hmm.
So I had another year of playing before the league completely collapsed. Um, but when the league folded, I panicked just like everybody else. And going overseas wasn't really an option at the time. Some players did, but it wasn't, the structure over there wasn't as competitive as what ours was. And like the financial situation, which was already low, wasn't, it wasn't equal to what we were making over here. Um, for me, I was in a position where I needed to get a job for me to, you know, fund myself. So I panicked, built my resume real quick and sent it out. And actually, while I was playing professionally, I was also substitute teaching on days, during the off season or on days when I could fill in here and there on an off day. The side hustles that we had are quite, there's a long list of side hustles I'm sure we can create of what the women have done. Um, so I sent out resumes and I got a teaching job, teaching middle school math and religion. And then, so I was happy in that. I ended up becoming the associate athletic director at the school. And when the NWSL came back, or not came back, into existence, I was then in another situation where do I leave this job that I've made myself, I've created a career of my own that, and I'm associate athletic director, making decent money, you know, teaching and whatnot, or do I go back to playing and making $12,000 a year and drop what I've done? And at that time, it just didn't make sense for me to shift back into playing mode because where I was in my career and what I was doing outside of soccer. Um, and the unstableness of like, will this thing last? How long am I going to hold on to playing? What is that going to look like? So I ended up making the decision to stay and teaching and being the athletic director. And in that, Mark Parsons, the head coach of the Washington Spirit at the time, called me and asked me to be his assistant. So I started coaching professionally while I was able to maintain this other job that I had. Um, so that was my transition. It was a hard decision. I held on to it for so many years of regret, a little bit of regret, but understanding. Um, but yeah, that's it's for another therapy session later.
No, I can imagine that would be tough. Because I would also imagine you have that little bit of doubt, like you mentioned, like, am I gonna go back to this and then in 3 years it's gonna fold again? It's like, um, that would be well. Then you did say, uh, offline that you were kind of player coaching as well. So you got like what to let go of playing, involuntarily, I guess. I can imagine would have been very tough mentally because you're doing one thing your whole life, you're playing, and then you kind of get a little taste of it again as a player coach. Was that worse almost to like kind of be doing it, or would you like, or was it better? Like, would you rather have just
Yeah,
had a
that's a
clean
good
break?
question because I would be in trainings and be like, I could still do this. And this
Yeah.
is, yeah, I could still be doing this. So there was a little bit of that. But then again, like my body didn't want that either.
Fair
Uh,
enough.
as a goalkeeper, all the pounding and falling to the ground and whatnot. That's a good question. it was a struggle, but I felt confident and secure in my decision. And then for some reason, this um, for me to leave the game and then be asked to join it again in not the same capacity as a player, but at a really high capacity as a coach was meaningful as well. And I was learning, that was another transition moment for me is, my next career could be this. And I was able to coach for 8 seasons, I think, with the Washington Spirit.
Did you ever have the thought or like I will I'm going to ask this question under the assumption that you did have this thought, but when did it pop into your head that we might be entering a golden era for women's soccer, and even though even if I can't play, I can be a steward for the next generation to help them learn from the stuff that we did wrong because this looks like it's going to actually last. When did that
I think
happen
the
for
real
you?
moment was honestly, and this is going to sound awful, but it kind of ties into the visibility matters portion
Hmm.
of it. But it was when all of the misconduct and mismanagement came out in the NWSL. I feel like that moment of, I think Pino might have quoted like "burn it all down." That moment of really, I feel like we were built. This league was built on sand, and when there's a wave that comes through, like everything's washed away. And that was very unstable.
Hmm.
While people were still trying to like create something stable, we just had so many bad people in places of management and in powerful positions that shouldn't have been. And really, it wasn't set up for true success. But until that moment, and then there was a shift, and unfortunately the moments where we get a lot of visibility is things like that happen, misconduct, mismanagement. You're seeing it, in this last World Cup with Spain and how the
Hmm.
president kissed a player on the lips, which is
I
absurd.
just
Like, we were just
It's
watching this
bananas.
Super Bowl and we didn't see any of that. So it's anyways, moments like that, the NWSL, when that all came out in 20, when was that, 2020?
Yeah, it sounds
Um,
about right. Yeah.
the US was really looking at it, and I think it made its way over the pond to like soccer, football communities that paid
Hmm.
attention. But this last moment with Spain was global.
Yeah.
World Cup men's and women's is one of the biggest sporting events that's globally seen. And for that to make global news was awful and atrocious, but at the same time, it got eyes on and continued eyes, unfortunately, on women's sports.
I
Um,
think even some of the men's players were like, we're not playing until this guy's gone, um, which was a very cool thing to see them stand up because they didn't have to do that, um, as well. But yeah, I remember seeing the headline. I was like, no, he didn't do it because I didn't watch the game. I saw the headline. I was like, no, like why? What would possibly possess you to like that?
yeah,
That's a good idea. I was
yeah,
just like, it's like I don't
yeah,
know.
same.
I
I
don't
think
know.
everybody was, and how can you not be?
Yeah, I don't know. And then if I don't know. However, he wanted to, then he didn't even apologize for it, which was the other weird thing. He was like, "Oh, I
They
didn't."
blamed it on the player.
Yeah, I was just like, "What? This doesn't make any sense." And whoever was running his PR thing did a horrible job. It's like the whole
Yeah,
thing
but
makes no sense.
that's just an example of, because I think somehow the president and the coach were tied together, but that's
Yeah.
an example of having the wrong people in powerful positions.
Hmm.
WSL for sure had, they could be good people, like some of them are good people, but just in positions that they weren't making proper decisions,
Yeah.
or listening to players or using their power to call things out. Um, and it was a lot of, you know, it's going to sound awful, but guys protecting guys.
Hmm.
Like like I was saying, the Spanish group, the president was somehow connected to the coach. That's how it was a lot in the women's game, where you have somebody, an owner hiring their kid's former club coach to coach this women's professional team, and they have extreme loyalty to each other. So it's, there's no true management and separation.
Hmm. I wonder if that's a symptom of it just being um a new thing like that, like the example that you use, an owner hiring their kids club coach. It's like how many, like there's a lot of women's coaches out there, but the owners, I feel like owners often don't know a lot about the sport.
Mm,
And so they're like, I trust this person.
yeah,
Let me just hire them. And then it creates a weird sort of like the loyalty, like you mentioned. And rather than, because it's not like these guys are going to go hire Pep Guardiola or Jurgen Klopp, right? So they don't know. And so they just they're like, I trust this one guy or one person.
yeah,
And
yeah, exactly.
then as the game grows and more coaches start to have, like, the U.S. women's team, oh, it's gonna bug me now. I don't remember who's the Chelsea coach that the U.S. women just hired.
Nice.
Yes, Emma Hayes. Um, but so she's a club coach from a big team in England, and now she's getting hired. And before, I don't think 5 years ago I would have thought that that would have happened.
Mm.
I don't know. Is that a
What
fair?
do you mean you and like her leaving Chelsea or
No,
US?
the US national or US soccer hiring somebody who I know we had previous coaches that weren't American, but they always seem to come from like internally maybe, or maybe that's just my own perception. But the US soccer actually looking outside to like not poach, but like take somebody who's in a position somewhere else and then bring
Yeah.
them over. Like this is a very successful coach just in an area of the women's game. Like it seemed like like that move would be very common in the men's game, I think. And that was the first one that I can recall in the women's game that modeled that sort of transaction or transfer for a coach, especially. I don't
Yeah.
I don't know if that's me paying not very much attention, but do you, is there any merit to that?
I think there is merit to that. I think that I mean Emma Hayes was a professional coach in the WPS. Was she there for the NWSL? She was a coach in the women's profession. She was at Chicago Stars, Red Stars.
Hmm.
So she was in the NWSL and then went overseas to Chelsea. I forget. Oh my God, I feel like I'm like losing my mind. She might have been the WPS too. We'll have to go check that, or if you can Google it real quick.
I'm
But
Googling
she
now. Keep going.
she was a coach in the US, our professional league here, and then went over to Chelsea. Um, so
Long Island Lady Riders.
oh, the Rough Riders, that's right. That
Yeah.
was the moment between WPS and the NWSL. There was like this weird period where all of us kind of dumped into the W League, and that was the
Yeah. Uh, she was at Iona College and then
Mhm.
Chicago Red Stars, yeah, in
Yeah.
2008.
Was that the WPS?
That would have been, yes,
Yeah.
WPS.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then she went back to England. So
Mhm.
she went to Chelsea 2012.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so yeah, if you look at that, like she was in the US, so are we poaching somebody from
I don't
overseas or
know, maybe.
but
But
yeah,
I
yeah,
guess
yeah.
it feels like a very high profile move.
We're definitely picking her up. It is a good hire for US soccer, and I'm really excited about it. I think it'll be a challenge for her because international play is just different, obviously, than club. You get them for the players for a very limited amount of time, and to implement your style and expectations and mesh a team is really hard. But I think I'm really excited about her and Denise Reddy coming over and spearheading that. Um, but then you're seeing movements like the Barca coach signing with the Washington Spirit once
Hmm.
their league is over, which is exciting. So things are happening for us to have movement with not only coaches but players as well. Um,
Yeah.
I
100%.
think we'll see like this ebb and flow. I think there have been some really good signings by the NWSL for this season internationals, but I think we're now going to see an ebb and flow of players coming in the NWSL and then going, to France, etc.
Hmm.
So it's
Yeah.
an exciting time, and I think it's exciting too for people to see. I always say, like women's sports, we can leapfrog. We already know like Major League Baseball and the Premier League. We already know how to make a professional league, and this is our third part of it, try at it. But we can leapfrog beyond like the startup of everything and get to a certain threshold. But I think it's exciting that, for me, I wasn't old enough or even around quite yet to see the St. Louis Blues in the NHL become a franchise and grow and become, finally a Stanley Cup winning franchise. I feel like people are able to see that right now with our league, the NWSL, with leagues overseas, with the WNBA and the new women's professional hockey league and the new women's professional volleyball league. We're able to see in our era, in our generation, not only women flourishing on a different level, but also the growth of how professional leagues come to existence and franchises are made.
Yeah, 1,000%. Even like there's a men's professional volleyball league now, and it's really cool just to see that everyone has who's dedicated their life to a sport. There's like it seems like there's more opportunities to go and make money being really good at your craft.
Mhm.
And then which I think is amazing. And then the growth of all the women's leagues, like you mentioned, is really huge. I think for the US women in particular, I think one thing that you guys really have going for you is the quality of the player at like relative to the rest of the world is great because there's already a ready-made almost like export of like American male players have kind of a stigma and coaches have kind of a stigma if they try to go to Europe a little bit. It feels like there's a little bit more that they have to prove. Um, Depending on how true or not true that is, at least there's a perception at least that that's the way it is.
Mhm.
And so I think that that really helps with the global game in terms of the infrastructure that we have here in the US now being able to match with like an England or a France, and there's no like, oh, it's American players, like yada yada. Now it's like an even already because we've won World Cups and we've exported really good players. Um, and it feels like everyone's kind of growing together, the Spains and Frances and the Englands of the world. And
Yeah.
it feels like there's more of a obviously when you go to the World Cup, you want to kick each other's butts, but like it feels like there's more of a togetherness in growing the women's game. I don't know, is that do you feel that as well?
I think so. I feel that. I Yes, short. Yes, I feel that and I believe that. I think that the U.S. Um, has been really motivating for the global game. Sorry, I'm just going to take notes so I don't forget what I'm going to say.
No, you're good.
And we're seeing that with, going back to the NWSL and standing up for misconduct. Like that's one thing. It empowered other women to, be brave enough to speak out across the world. And then we're seeing, with the equal pay CBA that the women's national team and the men's national team agreed to and signed off on was massive. And now you're seeing a push, again, motivating and inspiring other federations, other teams to call for the same equal, equal resources, equal facilities, equal pay when they're traveling, etc. Like even we want equal pay on the World Cup. Like, that buyout, that bonus that you get for winning the World Cup is significantly different, but it's gone up. But the person, like the gap is still way too extreme.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and again, that's why we need more media deals, bigger media deals. We need investment. We need sponsorship. Uh,
Hmm.
we need to continue to grow our fan base and reach fan bases that new fan bases that aren't just soccer specific.
Hmm.
Um, you see that again with the
Yeah.
game community as well.
Do you ever worry, and I just thought of this when you were talking about sponsorships and the World Cup bonuses specifically. And I don't um I haven't had this thought before, so I'm gonna ask it, and I don't know if it's not meant to if it comes out in a way that's not uh great. I apologize in advance. But do you ever worry that the push to grow the women's game is like, do you ever worry about a portion of it that is not organic, especially you going into the agency side and pushing for sponsorships and stuff? Do you ever worry that there is a like an inorganic side, right? Because there's an economic problem with the number of eyeballs that are on various things. Like if you look at a Women's World Cup final, um, the viewership, but then if you look at like an NWSL game versus like a Premier League game or a Women's Super League game, like sometimes the numbers don't necessarily go.
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
you've got these big companies that are looking to sponsor and they say, well, okay, great, you had this number of people for this one game, but over the course of the season, it's way less. Um, is that a, I don't, is that a, does that worry you at all that like sponsors are going right now because it seems to be the socially right thing to do, and then
yeah,
eventually they'll just pull back and you guys will be left in the dust kind of, or like how is that a
totally.
thing? Yeah.
I think it's like certainly a trend right now, right? It's trendy to invest in women's
Mm-hmm.
sports, show up to games and watch the um, Angel Reese's and Caitlin Clark's blowed up in the NCAAs,
Mm-hmm.
like that's a trend, yes, but it's also like sparking interest. Like you need to show up to the table and know who those two players are.
Mm-hmm.
So people are dialing in a little bit more. The push to grow the game, again, I think investment and sponsorship need to understand that it's not a quick gain. It's still a long game, and people are going to find their investments in 5, 10 years from now for sure. But it's not like a quick turnaround. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Um, and it, I'm worried if it's yeah if there is this part of it that's not organic and that people are jumping on because it's a trend. You see companies investing or having sponsorship with certain players, like the top 1% of the national team players, um, are getting a lot of sponsorship deals, and they should. That's
Yeah.
awesome. But from then on, there's like a massive drop, and it's like, where's the money still?
Mm-hmm.
Of For those not like Alex Morgan type players or Crystal Dunn type players.
Yeah.
It's not a bad thing. We need those players to like grow the game and succeed and all of that stuff. But we need to also support these players who are making $40,000 and who are the reason why the NWSL is still sustainable, who are doing the work without getting the spotlight.
Mm-hmm.
Or like a Tori Huster who just retired and she had a phenomenal, phenomenal career. And she's the president of the PA, and her work didn't look like Megan Rapinoe and her advocacy and her platform that she had, but Tori's done incredible work that matches what Megan Rapinoe's done. So I think there needs to be more recognition across the board. And I understand that that's not the same in the NBA. Like people know LeBron James, but they might not know number 15 on the roster at LA.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that that's not um, proper representation that I'm saying, but just imagine this. Imagine, I'm making this up, but I'm sure they invest a lot of money. Who's the biggest NFL sponsor?
I don't know. Bud Light
I,
probably sounds
I
right.
was gonna say,
Or Budweiser, yeah.
um, AB InBev. I was gonna say them, the Anheuser-Busch.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's just think, and I kind of challenge them to do this. AB InBev, Anheuser-Busch, invest as much sponsorship as they put in the NFL for one season into the NWSL and see what that does for their growth. I don't know what those numbers look like, but can you imagine? what
Yeah.
$100 million, or I have no idea what that looks like. We can also Google that. But imagine what that money would look like instead of them, the percentage is off. It would probably look like a $5 million deal for NWSL. Um, but just the significant direct impact that would have on the growth of the game would be incredible.
Yeah, a couple 100 million. According to Google, yeah, Anheuser-Busch, 230 million is one of the biggest ones.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
what
for
happens
sure.
when each of those, they say we need visibility and we need reach, but imagine the reach that that would provide for this the league to grow.
Yeah. So, yes, I'm totally with you. To follow up on the one before though, I or not though, and there's only a certain amount of time in the day for people to watch sports. And so
Yeah,
if people have already picked their like, I really like Arsenal and I like uh the Lakers and I like the Yankees and those are my teams that I watch and then I go to work and then I've got my kids and then I whatever. How yeah, well I guess that like that there's like a I don't really know what I'm asking.
well,
There's kind of there's like
that
a
you have to make a choice on who
yeah,
you're
there's
going
like
to
an
watch.
inherent for the sponsor people in particular, there's like an inherent um we want to grab the most eyeballs at these times because most people are watching blank at blank time on like NFL Sunday, for example, right? And so there's this like, okay, maybe we don't want to be a direct competitor with the NFL or the MLS, but there's a different market that we have to break into, kind of. I don't know. Do you kind of understand where I'm going a little bit? I'm
Yeah,
not.
they need to
Yeah,
pick where the viewership is most, essentially.
yeah.
Yeah, for branding and whatnot, and marketing. Um, the good news about that is I feel like, well, people certainly have at least two ways of watching. Like you can
Hmm.
have the NBA on the big screen while you're watching something else on your phone. I think we've all done that
Yeah,
before,
yeah.
right? People have multiple houses, or not houses, TVs in their house to watch multiple games at once. Uh,
Hmm.
so I think there are ways around that. I don't think that like single viewership is really current unless you're going to an event to watch it, or you're like, I don't know, having people over to watch it. You're usually scrolling while watching something else, or watching
Yeah.
something else while watching something else.
Or like
Um,
the highlight packages maybe could be. I don't recall the last time I saw an NWSL. Well, I know the season's just starting, but I don't recall the last time I saw like an NWSL highlight. Like how the Premier League, the NBC Sports team does a really good job just condensing the game into like 10-minute highlight videos. I don't does NWSL do that as well?
yeah, it's usually on like the YouTube.
Oh,
That's where I find the
I'll have to go
highlights.
look. I'm sure it's on there for sure. Um, but yeah, the marketing just for that really intrigues me. I think they're doing a really good job thus far. I like the getting the cards into EAFC was huge because you got people running around. Like every other game I play against Alex Morgan and her card is nuts. So,
Yeah,
okay, so we got the marketing, and then I want to talk. So you got into the agency part. And I feel like this is kind of a good segue. I know we didn't get into the agency stuff as early as maybe I wanted, but I think it was good conversation thus far. So, how did you get into the agency piece specifically? And then on top of that, you have your own agency, correct? Is that correct as well?
yeah.
So you're like, okay, not only am I going to be an agent, but I want to start my own one as well. How was the thought process for both of those steps?
I would say it's kind of like merged. It's like all a compilation and blend of all my experiences in a way. Um, I when I was talking about my playing career uh, earlier in the show, I was saying that at that time in St. Louis, the national team type players had representation and everybody else did not. Um, so that was my first eye-opening moment of like sheer panic and this like imbalance of representation. Um, again, we can argue on why or why not, but I think overall, like women need representation.
Yeah,
So that
for
was my
sure.
first look. And when I was looking at, trying to get picked up by teams, I didn't have an agent at the time, but I like posed as my agent, emailing people to make them think I was more serious or I was like, a higher quality because I had an agent representing me. Um, and then from there, I, through my time in the NWSL from the very beginning, I was always having conversations with players and helping them through careers. Um, I was a director of scouting and I was a head coach of the reserve team for the Washington Spirit. So I was bringing in players, recruiting them, managing them, seeing how they fit, would they fit our play model, would they fit in the culture, etc. And then from there, I would create draft boards and, we would go into the draft and hopefully we would pick up some of our reserve team players, which we did. We picked up Andy Sullivan. I forget what year that was. Um, but if they didn't get drafted, I was helping them find teams overseas to continue their career. So that was like another contact point of me playing an agent of and helping players find teams to continue their path on.
Was this prior to you being like an official agent that you were helping them?
Yeah,
Oh, so you were just doing
I
it
was a
anyways.
coach, yes.
Okay,
And
very
then on
nice.
top of that, as I was a coach, I don't know if I should be saying this because it's recorded, but I was like essentially illegally helping players negotiate their contracts because I had the inside scoop on like what they should be making and what the club was kind of offering them
Uh-huh.
um, versus what they were worth. And this is like, we're talking the player was offered $27,000 when they should be asking for 30.
Yeah.
So it's not that much money.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of money for a player.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
that's 10% of your over 10% of your income, you know?
Yeah.
Uh, or just at 10%. Anyways, so that was my another moment that I was like, gosh, these women really need help in like everything from and then we had the implosion of the league with all the misconduct and mismanagement of another point in which women need representation because they need people to advocate and speak for them and represent them properly and not treat them as, are you a moneymaker for me or not? We need to treat people as humans.
Yeah.
You're seeing a growth in agency right now and people turning heads to the women's game because we finally arrived, or we are arriving. Um,
Mhm.
so you're seeing bigger agencies turn to the women's game because they want their piece of the pie, which that's business.
Yeah.
But at the time, when was that? 2020? I don't know. I had this vision for years of like, there's not enough representation. There can be an agency out there. Like somebody could build an agency. And at the time, so I was in all of the, oh no, are you there? Yeah, there
Yeah,
you
I'm here.
go. Something swiped on my computer and I
All
thought,
good.
so when I was during that 2020 moment, I was witnessing and experiencing and reporting what was happening from from our franchise, and nothing was happening. Um, and I was on the path to be a GM. Ultimately, I like kind of interviewed for the GM position because our associate GM, assistant GM had just gotten fired for, well, sorry, released for personal reasons, but it really wasn't personal.
Yeah, great.
Anyway. Um,
Unbelievable.
so I went
Anyways,
in that day and I was like, there's a backstory to that too. But I want the job. The league could be doing X or the club could be doing X, Y, and Z. This is what I feel the pathway is for the future. Um, anyways, I ended up not getting that position. I even said I don't need the title. I just want the responsibility and like to learn. And I later found out that so when that happened, I quit because there was all this mismanagement, misconduct. Things, the future for me at the Washington Spirit wasn't looking bright. And I was like, if I can't be in this position to impact, then I don't really want to be in it. And at the time, it was like that in every location. Like I couldn't go to Portland because the exact same stuff was happening in Portland. I couldn't go to North Carolina because it was happening in North Carolina. So that was my moment of how do I understand and be educated more on the GM side while helping players. And that was kind of the agency route in which um, that I took. So that's how I landed up as an agent. But I was later told that the head coach that ended up getting fired for like a laundry list of things didn't like me and felt intimidated for me to be in a GM type role, and that's why I didn't get it. And that was word straight
Oh,
from the owner's mouth. So
I'm sure you were shocked.
yeah, I was shocked to actually hear that was the reason why. But again, it's not shocking. But we all
Yeah.
have our stories. I'm happy that everything happens for a reason. I'm full of cliches today. You can make a clip of just my cliches. But I'm here helping women for a reason, making hopefully some sort of impact in their life.
Yeah. So what made you decide that you wanted to do the agency just for yourself, like your own agency and not join because there's all these agency groups that are floating around out there. Um, was it that whole situation that you were kind of like, it seems like it's not great places, but I know that I can help, so I'm just gonna do me and do my best to help, or was there more like, do you have agents that work for you as well?
It's just me. No.
Is that a
Um,
is that a future maybe-ish plan?
Yeah, I'm in like this period of needing to expand. I've been in this period for a couple of years, well, not a couple of years, like a year, and I'm working to grow that. So, I don't know. It wasn't necessarily that I didn't want to join an agency. Um, it was during COVID, like the women's sports hadn't really hit their boom yet. Um, I don't know. I just thought it was an opportunity to learn and grow and try to build something that was my own. And you see a lot of companies that are, made by guys and not as many made by women. So it's like, why not? You see like law firms with their last names on it and agencies with their last name on it. I'm like, why can't I have my own with my last name? Um, but anyways, there wasn't really any reason other than I knew I could do it on my own and launch it on my own, um, without like kind of like bureaucracy.
Yeah. Well, and especially because you'd already been doing it um legally. So but was it easy for you to get players because you had already been doing it and because you had built the relationships with the ones that you were scouting for the reserve team? Is I would imagine that not a lot of them had agents anyways. So was it you reaching out saying like, "Hey, I'm going to start this thing. Do you want to be involved?" Or did people reach out to you or some of both or like, and also um do you know who Richard Lee is? Like, do you deal with mostly goalkeepers or everyone?
Everyone
So there's this guy in England. Do you know who Richard Lee is?
don't
He's
share.
I don't, well, maybe, I don't know. So I listened to Ben Foster's podcast, the Fozcast, and Richard Lee is this like goalkeeping super agent that's in England. And Ben is always like, any goalkeeper transfer that happens in England, Richard's the agent. And I was like, he calls him the goalkeeping super agent. Anyways, it's kind of an anecdote. But anyway, so was it the players come to you? You had I mean, you already had relationships with all these players, especially from the Spirit, but was it kind of or maybe easier or more a smooth sailing to get to lift the business off the ground than it otherwise would have
I
been?
think it was difficult. All of it was difficult. Like,
Yeah.
come sign with me. Like, I have never done this before, but have faith. I think my experience from having shared experience with players help a lot. Um, I think understanding what they have gone through and what they're going through as women and being a professional athlete and what that is. From anything from not wanting to be on a team in Florida because of their rights and laws in Florida to um, I had another example, but it slipped my mind because I was just thinking of how outrageous that is that women actively don't want to go to certain teams because of laws that are,
Yeah.
don't give them full body autonomy or whatever it might be. Um, but I think, shared experience, understanding, and so I think it was not easy to lift off. And it still isn't easy. Like I'm pitching players that could sign with a bigger agency and bigger agencies have more contacts and assumed more sponsorship deals and things like that. And they see that certain players are with this agency, so in order to be on that level, I have to go with that agency, which you see that across the board. It's not just women's athletics. Um, so it was a gamble, both for me, representing players and representing players, allowing me to represent them. So I wouldn't say it was easy. Um, but right now I'm at capacity, and yet I still get incoming emails and calls and text about representation and seeing if I'm available, which is exciting. But there's certainly a need there, and I think the amount of players out there that need representation is still a significant indicator that women's sports aren't quite there yet.
Yeah. So what kind of services, I guess, would you offer? You mentioned sponsors and obviously helping with contract negotiations and finding potential opportunities, reaching out to teams, things like that. Is what is like maybe to expand on that if I just listed like the main three things, but like what's kind of like a week like for you in terms of who are you talking to? Obviously there's some seasons, some parts of the year that are busier than others, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But like what's like a week for you? But I
Chaos.
don't want to say day because people will be like, well, it depends.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It is all over the place, but and then you go through seasons. Like I'm always
Yeah.
talking to GMs. I'm always like, having those conversations and those touch points, um, to see how my players are doing or what they're looking for. Um, I think, and then obviously there are you're always looking for sponsorship that never ends. Uh, checking in with players, whether it's through text or having calls with them. Um, but I think the main thing, I can't give away my secrets, Eric. The main thing for me, and I think again, it's understanding the reality we live in, is um, making sure my players are set up for success post-career. We know
Mm,
that somebody can get injured tomorrow in training and not play ever again. And we know that they can have a long career for 12 seasons, um, but not have enough of a savings. We're not making $20 million or even $1 million in a year. You see Mal Pugh just signed 5 years for 2 million.
hmm.
And then we're on the other extreme, we're listening to how Patrick Mahomes is renegotiating his contract for lower so they can buy more players to bring in. So there's just like this massive gap, and a lot of growth for women. That's opportunity, right, for growth.
Yeah.
Um, but for me, it's really making sure that my players know their rights under the CBA, and their protection, and setting them up for success post-career, because we need a job, at following our career, whether it ends tomorrow or it ends in 12 years. Uh,
Yeah.
what that looks like looks different to each player. I kind of have things that I like to do to set up for them and to discuss with them, and to make them continuing to think. Because as you grow as a person, like you might really want to be a coach when you're done playing in college, but then 3 years down the line in your professional career, you want to shift and now be a GM. So what does that look like and how do you get there?
Yeah. So if you were to, let's say I'm a player that, or let's say you're trying to get, trying to sign a marquee sort of player. What's your pitch to them? Like, hey, you should come sign with me as your agent.
Um, my pitch is it's not like I have an incredible pitch deck or like I'm showing you the world. Like I just want to be real with you and upfront. And this is what, like what's your biggest dream and what that looks like and how do we get there? More of creating a pathway for them
Hmm.
and envisioning that for them and pitching it to them while, working together in that. Um, but the agency world is very transactional, so it's hard. And we're seeing that more and more now with in college with the NIL.
Mm.
Everybody's like, what this player got that. Why didn't I get that? That must be that agent, or that must be that NIL person, or that person, that agent bought this player a boat. Why didn't my agent buy me a boat? I've
That's
heard those stories, by
bananas.
the way. I've heard those stories.
That's bananas.
Not in the
Well,
women's game, but
I'm sure the NIL has actually opened quite the can of worms, I would imagine, for all sports, to be honest.
Mhm.
All right, one last question, and then one more question from the last guy, the last guest. What's the craziest story you've had? Could be as an agent, but also you don't have to say names or incriminate, well, yourself or or anyone else. But like why like I guess I ask that in the vein of like the craziest thing that you've seen like in a negotiation or something along those lines. Obviously, when you're on a team and like your teammates go out and do wild things and you're like, "Oh, I can't believe so and so." Anyways,
Yeah.
but more like in a business sense, like what's the craziest thing? Because when I was talking with Daniel G, he was saying like how some of the owners like Daniel Levy or like some of these other people are just like very like when you walk in and you're like, "Really? Like that's how they are?" Or things like that.
Yeah. As an agent, I'm not really sure because I feel like the NWSL has been like super tight
Mm.
currently.
Hmm.
Back in the day when I was a coach and I've seen some stuff. Um, some shocking things, some entertaining things, even playing. Um,
Could be those two.
I don't know. I don't know if the one moment really sticks out. Man, you put me on the spot. My brain doesn't work when it's on the spot. Nothing crazy from an agent side yet. Um, from my disposition, I'm not wild and crazy, and I don't demand and expect wild and crazy things, so I don't get into those games.
That's fair.
Um, and I don't think that is how to conduct business, even though sometimes I wish I was like the Wolf on Wall Street, because I feel like
Yeah,
days you have to show up like that. But I'm a firm believer that's not how you need. You don't have to connect with people like that to be successful.
fair enough. So the question that the last guest asked is very much in vein with what you just said. He said, "Do you have a primary like philosophy or framework that informs your choices or how you interact with people slash the world?"
Do I have an inner framework on how I interact with the world?
He used the word primary philosophy, but I didn't know if that would get what he was trying to say across, so I
I don't know. I think
paraphrased.
like I this is gonna sound so like not deep and philosophical, like he's wine.
It doesn't have to be.
But
It doesn't
like
have to be.
kind works. Like being kind works. And I've been told so many times in this arena that I'm either too nice or that I'm like the nicest person they've come across in my line of work. But I don't mean that as like tact, like a tactful way. I'm just saying like in the world, like what you remember when people are nice to you and kind for you, or you see somebody, witness somebody doing something kind for like outside themselves for somebody else. Um, and again, I know that's like not super deep, but it works. And I'm bound to make it work. I have one of my dear friends is in out in LA in that industry, and she too has been told that she's too nice quite often. And she's just bound and determined to, she's like a pretty big deal out there too. So her kindness is working and you find success in that. And I think that's important to share across the board. That's how you make friends. That's how you make fans. That's how you interact with the world. You put that energy out there to hopefully receive it back on yourself, but ultimately to make people feel good.
Yeah, I fully agree. It doesn't have to be a deep answer. I think that's a great answer. And you're 100% right. People remember that and they're more inclined to afterwards, like if you're very nice to somebody or very kind to somebody, and later, like 3 years later, that like you shoot them a text and they're say, "Hey, can you connect me with blank person?" If you were not very nice to them, they might be like, "No, I'm good." But if you are
Yeah,
nice to them,
exactly.
then they'll probably do it. And it's a good, yeah,
Yeah,
no, it doesn't. I think that was plenty
I
deep,
think
and don't sell yourself short. That's a good answer, and because it's easily digestible and it's actionable, and I think that that's very. I mean, yeah, no, that's a good
yeah,
answer.
and I think it's just true. Like you're never entering a situation where you've been unkind to somebody. Or if you have been unkind, you like remember it and remember the person it was towards, and like you either apologize or you sit in awkward like existence with that person. But I think it never lies and it never fails. Like never have I gone. I'll give an example. I won't because I'll do this off the record.
Okay,
Um,
sounds good.
but yeah, it never fails.
Where can the people find you on the socials or if anything
Oh,
that you've got going on?
Eric, like this is the moment where I start the music and do like a big like catch me at my handle. I don't post often or ever. My channel is pretty lame, but I my handle is at KJ Spisak, Spisak, um, on Instagram. I think I have a Twitter, but I don't use it. I'm just very detached.
It's probably a good thing if we're
Yeah,
being honest. All
yeah.
right. Any last nickels before I get you out of here?
No, I appreciate what you're doing, and I like you're coming at life from all angles, and nothing's off topic.
Yeah, makes
So
it more fun.
hopefully I've educated you on some women's sports history.
You
And
have
if you're ever in the DC or New York area, let me know. We can connect and get you to a game.
100%. We'll make it happen. All right, guys. Thanks for listening. We will see you guys next time. Peace.
Bye.